Okay, so back into Photoshop, we can close that up. We don't need to save that part. The next thing I want to open is still in week number 10. It is a file called 940copy.psd, if you can open that guy up. Yeah. Did everybody find that? Again, 940 inside session number 10. And it opens up and it looks like a light blue vague gradient. So, to explain what's going on in this image, what you're seeing right here at the bottom, this is actually, it is a real file. So you can create synthetic files in Photoshop. The problem that you have when you do that is though it has no pixel content grain at all. So when you actually use your camera and you make a photograph, whatever, especially most people would think of what you look at, what you can see in the shadows is there's, especially if you have noise, it looks like there's film grain in there. It looks like there's grain in the photograph. When you create a synthetic file in Photoshop, it doesn't have any of that grain. So it doesn't mean you can't use synthetic files in Photoshop. It just means that if you're going to use them, it helps if you add a little bit of noise to that grain, to that synthetic file to emulate the way it would be if it was really photographed with a camera. Does that make sense, everyone? However, in this case, I knew that and I wanted to avoid that. So I literally went outside and shot a picture of the sky. So this is all this is blue sky. If you double click on the smart object, you'll see that it's actually been processed and changed its color slightly. And the reason I changed the color slightly in this was there's a woman who shoots a lot for Harper's Bazaar, and she has this really hyper recognizable color of sky. It's not quite real. Anyway, and I fell in love with this color, and I actually took a page out of a Harper's Bazaar, I scanned it, I went into Photoshop, I blurred it so that I didn't have the halftone dots in there, so that I just had the blue color, and I dropped a color picker on it and got the RGB values of it, and I recreated that with my sky. Simple. We good on this part? Okay, you can hit cancel here if you open that up, and you don't need that. However, I wanted to then put this into a real place. And I was thinking in the whole terms of photographs, I was thinking about those really sort of like famous Santa Fe photographs that Bruce Weber had done, or that, I mean, you can go back to Georgia O'Keeffe, whatever, that when I think about those sort of exterior architectural elements in Santa Fe, they tend to be that bone white stucco on this brilliant blue sky and really hard shadows. That's the way I think about it. So that was what I was going to recreate for this composite. So just to give you some idea of where I'm heading with all of this. So if you skip the second layer that's in the layer stack here, that's a gradient, we'll get to it. I'll show you what the gradient, but it helps to give it context first. If you can click on the layer that's right above it, you'll actually see it's a scene that actually what I ended up doing was I took foam core and I built a model of what I thought the building would look like, or the building that I wanted. And that's what you're looking at right now. So the thing that you're looking at is about this tall. It's the pieces of foam core that were like 8.5 by 11 inches, like a normal piece of paper. I just cut them into a model and built this sort of like small set. So it has a floor, it has two back walls, and one of the back walls goes up higher. However, I wanted this to be believable in its lighting as well, so I took this on top of my roof. This is available light on the top of my roof. What you can see back behind this are two house plants that I have that were also on my roof. However, what's important about this is that there is a shadow that's sitting right here on part of this model set that I wanted to keep. So this part was giving me a lot of clues. However, I couldn't have this background because, again, this would give me scale. I didn't want the scale in here. So if you hold down your Shift key and click on the mask that's on here, it will actually get rid of that. So this became so it's basically hiding that part, and it's showing me the blue layer that's underneath. However, the way skies really work is that, especially during a high noon and very bright skies, you actually end up with a lighter horizon line and a darker sky at the apex of it, because the light itself is actually polarized. So to give me that, that's what this gradient's all about. So if you click on the eyeball for the gradient, you'll see I'm getting a lower glow in the sky, and then it goes to a darker sky as it moves up to the top. So this was all the work that I did simply to build this. However, there's one more thing that you need to look at. If you zoom way in on this, you can actually see the cut edges of the foam core. You can see them right here. I wanted to get rid of those. So if we go to the layer that's just above this background layer and click to turn it on, all it is masking out the edges of the foam core so that I don't have so that they're not showing. Because I felt like the edges of the foam core, you could see the foam that was inside of it. It actually gave this thing scale, and I was trying to remove any sense of scale in here, because when I add the body to this, the body and the scale of the model, they wouldn't fit. Again, if you had a clue that the background was really only 11 inches tall, then a full-grown person isn't going to fit into that very well. So then finally, if you click on the eyeball next to the body link, you will actually see the beginnings of my composite. So this is where I'm starting from here, and again, I want to actually build in the shadows for this. However, in looking at this image just from the get-go, what is my problem? Something that some of you ran into. By the way, I'm not going through all of your work here because we're going to do it. Actually, we're going to work on them in class, so you'll see we'll get to them anyway. I have conflicting light. Where's the light coming in the background? Oh, you say you really can't tell. Really? What in the background gives you a hint about where the light is?
It's coming in from like the side a little bit.
Which side?
The right side.
How do you know?
Because the shadow is like
There's something creating a shadow in here. If the light was coming from the left, I would have to see that object that is creating that shadow. It isn't there. So the light has got to be coming from the right on my background. What about the light on the girl?
from the front.
What? It's coming where? From above? Anyone else? So here's the trick that's hard. Everybody looks at the highlights for this stuff. Don't look at the highlights. Look at the shadows and then tell me where the light's coming from. Especially look at the shadows on her legs. Look at this shadow right here, big as life. That shadow on the inside of her leg could not come from a front light. The only way in the world that is going to ever happen is a light that's coming from the left-hand side. Right? Again, ignore the light. Everybody looks at the light on the face. So, and everybody says, oh, well, it's this flat light on her face. It's got to be coming from above. You're not going to see this on the video, but you will hear it. So everybody thinks it's like this. So this shadow that's actually hitting me, I've got a flat light on my face, whatever, this is flat, right? And you say, well, if you move it over here to the side, you would never get that look, right? You would never have a flat light because, I mean, look at the shadow on my face. Don't you see this in shadow over here? The shadow from this is hitting my nose shadow. Don't you see all of that, right? So I've got shadow on my face, and that part's obvious. But what happens when I do this? Isn't my face now completely shadowless? Yes. Show me, somebody point out where my nose shadow is coming from this light. Doesn't exist. Because I'm right into this light. When I turn this way, then I cast a shadow. But like this, I don't cast a shadow. Really? Are we good on this? Her face is tilted up into the light, and it appears to be shadowless, but you still pick up a small amount on this side right over in here. But nonetheless, don't ever look at the highlights. It's all about looking at the shadows. So I need to either flip the girl or flip the background to actually make these two match. So in my case, I'm going to flip the girl. To do that, select the body group. You need to make sure that the whole body group is selected. Come up to the Edit menu, down to Transform, and then down to Flip Horizontal. So again, take a look at my screen where I'm at. Edit menu, down to Transform. We're not flipping the image. Some people get this confused. They'll come up to image and they'll come down to canvas rotation and say, oh, okay, I'm going to flip the canvas horizontal. That doesn't solve my problem. That would flip everything horizontally, and I would still have a mismatch of lighting. So it's, again, up to edit, down to transform, down to flip horizontal. The girl will now flip the other way, and she is now matching the lighting of my background. Are we good on this part? Okay, I'm going to open up this girl really quickly and just check out what else is going on here. There's a lot of stuff that's going on in this group that I want to keep in this group. So I'm going to generate a version of this girl that is not dependent on all these layers. So to do that, hold down the Option key and click on the eyeball of the group, and it will turn everybody else off. And then with the group still selected, hold down the Command, Option, Shift, and hit the letter E. It will make a stamped version of this girl by herself on a clear background that has all of the information that existed inside of that group. I've got it all tricked out. I'm not doing major transforms anymore. I'm not doing things that I need to maintain this. So anyway, that's how I'm going to deal with this part. I am going to convert this to a smart object, just again to play this safe. So up to the layer menu, down to smart objects and convert to smart object. Finally, I'm going to turn off the eyeball for the body group because I don't want another version of this body sitting right beneath this one. I only want to work with one body on this, and then I'm going to turn on all the layers that represent the background. So now what I've got is an independent version of what was in the body up on its own layer. Is everybody good with this part? Okay, so our two shadows. Again, shadows belong where they sit in this hierarchy is they need to be on top of the background but underneath the girl. But I've got a compound situation. It's sort of hard to see it on this screen right here. It's easier to see it on mine, and hopefully you can see it on your screen as well. There is a floor that actually goes back to this triangle piece, and then the triangle piece is in it. So again, if you remember the little thing that I just did with my flashlight in the Dr. Pepper can, is that there's a shadow that's on the back wall that actually imitates the size and the shape of the can in the case of the Dr. Pepper, but in this case it would be the girl. And then there's a shadow that runs along the floor that connects the two. So that's what we're basically going to build here. So to do the girl shadow, to do the initial shadow first, I'm simply going to make a selection of the girl. So I'm going to hover over the girl, hold down the Command key and click. That loads her as a selection. Then I'm going to click on the body group because, again, I want to make a shadow layer, but it needs to be underneath the girl. So I don't want to add this on top and then move it down. I'm just going to select the body group, and then I'm going to add an empty layer on top of that. So it's just a blank layer, and I'm going to rename this Shadow 1. And with Shadow 1 active and an active selection of the outline of the figure going, I simply need to fill this with black. So black is my foreground color. Option delete fills it with black. That didn't fill it with black. Command D to deselect. Now if I turn off the girl, you'll see that what is right behind her is a perfect outline of her in black. That's all I've made. Everybody good on this? We okay there, True?
No.
Where did you get lost?
The layer. So you want me to just create a new layer?
But the layer's got to be underneath the girl on top of the background.
Yep.
And then fill it with black. If you've got an active selection of the girl, of the outline of her body.
Oh, yeah. And then I have to... How do you feel like it?
So again, if black is your foreground color, it's Option delete. If it's your background color, it's Command delete.
Okay. I thought I was wrong because I can't see that yours is a transparent background. I thought it was white. And I was like, oh, no.
Yeah. Transparent background. All right, we need to make a copy of this guy because we've got, again, two shadows. So again, Command J will make a copy of it, but I'm going to rename it Shadow 2 and say OK to that. So I'm going to turn the figure back on for the girl. I'm going to double click on the hand to kick all the way back out. It's a little too far out. The first thing I'm going to do is set the shadow on the back wall. It's the easiest one to set. I'm going to do that as shadow number 2. It doesn't matter which one, whether it's 1 or 2. That part won't really matter. I'm going to click on 2. I'm going to hit the V key to get the move tool, and I'm going to simply drag it out. And what I'm trying to establish here is how I feel like the light would really interact with this girl and drop down on the background. So I know that the light is coming from up above and from the side. I know that both things are happening. So her head would have to be lower in this, and it would have to be further down. There's no question about that. But now what I'm looking at is that, do I believe that the distance from the light at the top, as it's coming down across this, is this where the shadow would land? And I feel like in my case, no. This is actually needs to raise up a little bit, and it needs to actually come back into the image a little bit more. I'm feeling like more like this, and to be honest with you, I'm deliberately trying to get to this edge where the background ends and the sky begins, because if I can do that, then I can actually mask out where the sky starts, because there would be no shadow on the sky. It would end with the edge of this background. Those are little things that help, again, just those little details like that help actually make this look like a more convincing composite. My problem with that right now is, though, I feel like I'm forcing this. I feel like the shadow in the background is too high, so I'm going to bring it down, even though I would love to carry it over there. And again, I'm looking at this. Is that light coming across? Do I believe that this is where the girl should be on the background? What do you guys think? Kinda good, kinda. Again, once we get through all of this, and people look at this, they will not go, oh my God, your shadow is just, it's like a quarter of an inch too high, or it's, a quarter of an inch too close to the, they're not going to look at that at all. They just assume this is real and they move on. Are we good on this part? Okay. So this is where I'm going to leave my girl. All you guys need to do is get her there somewhere roughly close to this, and you'll be fine. Okay. So if you take a look down in your, channels palette, I've actually built selections for you already just to save us time. So the first one I want is the back wall. So it's the very bottom of the channel selections. Hover your cursor over the thumbnail, hold down the command key and click. It will load it as the selection, and then come back over to your shadow number 2, the one that's on this back wall, and simply add it as a layer mask. And it actually leaves the girl on the back wall but gets rid of the part of her that was on the floor. Because again, that's how this shadow is ultimately going to work. It goes from the girl's feet to this background, but then what happens on the background is very similar. What happens on the floor is very distorted, but what happens on the background is extremely similar to the outline of the girl. And if you paid attention to the Dr. Pepper can, you actually saw that part. There was the outline of the Dr. Pepper can was pretty good on the background. It was a little bit larger, but nonetheless, it was pretty close to the outline of the can. But then the shadow that connected the can to the background, back wall, whatever, was flat, distorted. It was a giant triangle. It didn't have anything to do with how the can looked. And so that's the part that we need to create now. We need to connect her feet to the background shadow. To do this, I'm going to go to the pasteboard, because you're going to want to be able to work outside of just the area that we're on right now. So hit the F key once to get to the pasteboard, and now we can do our second part, our shadow number 2. I'm sorry, the second shadow, which I've labeled shadow number 1. So to do this guy, we actually need to transform it. So hit Command T, make sure that you've got Shadow 1 selected. Command T. Now in this case, I need it to stay connected at her feet. So I'm going to grab the anchor point. If you do not have your anchor point showing, it's the little check mark right underneath the word Photoshop. Make sure you've got that checked, and you'll get the anchor point right in the middle of your transform dialog box. But we can move this, and I'm going to move it right down and stick it right between both of her feet. And now when I actually come outside of it, I'm not going to stay inside of it, inside of the bounding box. I'm going to stay outside of it. You get the double-headed arrow, and you can rotate this thing, and I'm going to rotate it back so that it ends up getting closer to the background. So I am now taking this shadow, I'm hopefully keeping it somewhat anchored at her feet, and then the rest of her body is going to go back to the background part. Now, there's a number of things that I know I've got to deal with. Number one, I've got to compress this body, but number two, I've got to stretch it further out, because the only thing that we see on the background are where the original shadow that we put back there, they come down. It's both of her legs hit that background. Well, that means that both of her legs can be the only thing that actually connect her feet to the background. So the first thing I'm going to do is zoom out, slide my image over. I'm going to grab the bounding slider for this shadow. This is why I'm on the paste board. And I'm going to click, and I'm simply going to drag it this way quite a bit so that I only have legs to connect to her legs. So then I'm also going to grab this other control handle, the one that's now sort of at the top part of it all, and I'm going to compress this down. Then we need to get into moving this whole thing. You can see she's completely disconnected now from her feet. So I'm going to just bring my cursor into the middle of the transform box, and I'm going to click to move this up to reconnect it to her feet. I'm going to zoom in to make sure that this is really pretty close to her feet. That part is right now. Now I can actually do a little bit of finessing on this. So I'm going to go to try to get the first edge of this outside edge to actually meet up with the outside of her leg on the back wall. So I need to push this in even more. Then I need to drag the other one, the lower handle, so that the outside edge of the other leg matches up to the outside of the other edge on the wall. And I'm just going back and forth the iterations on this. You don't need to worry too much about how what's actually happening on the floor. It's really just these edge lines that we're looking to sort of line up. You'll see why in just a second. But that edge lines up pretty good, and this edge lines up pretty good. If it's not perfect, that's okay. We'll fix this in just a second. However, again, it's not on her feet, so I'm going to rotate this. Take it back. I'm not going to rotate that. I'm just going to move the entire thing so that it gets closer to her feet. And then we do need to rotate this a little bit more. So all this that we're changing here, this is what becomes the tricky part about doing all of this, because every time you move one thing, something else moves. If your cursor or your moving thing is doing the same thing that mine's doing right here, it's jumping all over the place, you can actually go to your arrow keys and you can tap things in slightly, and it'll do it a little bit slower. But again, we're just trying to work this. If you can't get it perfect, you want to get it pretty close. And again, I'm not worried about the inside edges. I'm just concerned about the outside edges and connecting it to her feet. And I'm feeling like mine's looking reasonably good right now. So it's at her feet. It's coming off of her feet the way I think it actually would. It's lining up with the outside edge of both her legs. The inside's a mess, but the outside's actually pretty good for me here. So I'm feeling pretty good about this, so I'm going to go ahead and accept this transform. And I'll say OK on that. Now we need to get rid of the part that's actually hitting the background as well. So I'm going to go back to my channels palette, and I'm going to load the back wall again. So Command-click to load the back wall. However, if I use this as the layer mask for this shadow that's supposed to be on the floor, it will get rid of the shadow that's on the floor and only show the stuff on the background. I don't want that. I want the exact opposite of that. So it's the inverse selection. Up to the select menu, down to inverse. This is not inverting your image. This is inverting the selection. You'll see right now, before I do this, I haven't done the inverse yet. You'll see that I've got marching ants on my image, but I don't have any marching ants around the edges. As soon as I go to the marching ant, the select inverse, I'll get marching ants around the edges. So up to the select menu, down to inverse, you'll see now I've got marching ants that are coming around the bottom, and I'm going to add that as a layer mask on my shadow 1. And this is actually where I'm at right now, and I have got some awful problem that actually happened in here. I didn't have that whole transform in here of this other leg, was nowhere near in close enough on this. So I'm going to go back in history to undo this. I'm going to go back to my free transform, and I've got to retransform this again. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to. Sometimes you have to start from the very beginning. I'm hoping I'm going to be able to just transform this by itself right now. So again, with shadow number 1, Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. I'm actually going to go after the warp tool right now to see if I can't. That might be an easier way to get this in. All I'm trying to do is push this one leg in here. So I'm going to see if the warp tool will actually give me the way to do that, and it does. And I'm going to check my other one to make sure I didn't go too far. And that's pretty good right there. So much better. And I'm going to go ahead and hit the check mark on that guy. So now I've got the beginnings of this. The leg on the left works pretty well for me. It actually meets up. Oh, I got to turn. I'm going to add my layer mask on this again. So again, go down to Command click to load the back wall as a selection. Invert the selection so that I get just the floor. It didn't invert. There we go. Add that as a layer mask. Still didn't get enough in there. I'm going to leave the mask active and just transform. So I'm going to break the chain link between the bottom shadow, our shadow number 1, and the mask that's controlling where I can see it. And then I'm just going to select the pixel content of that layer and do my transform, Command T. I'm going to stick with the warp and actually push this in. And I feel pretty good about that. Don't worry about this other leg as long as you keep one of the edges. And you don't even need to keep both of the edges, but because we're going to fix those in a second. All right, so this is looking reasonably good to me right now. It's still on her feet. I'm going to go ahead and accept that part. So now the issue that I've got with this, if you zoom in and take a look at this, you'll see that there's areas of her leg that don't match up, and these shadows would actually have to touch one another. So my first problem is this, this little bit of her leg on the background shadow doesn't match the one that's on the floor. I'm going to fix that right now using the pen tool. Hit the P key, make sure that you are working on the pixel layer of this. The layer mask is going to hide just the background, but it'll show us everything that's on her, on the floor. And I'm going to click right on that junction part of the back leg, and then I'm going to come down onto the leg part down in here. I'm going to click and I'm going to round this off so that it actually looks like some part of her leg is then coming into this. And then I'm just going to come back. You don't want to go outside on this because I'm going to fill this selection with black, but I'm just going to come back inside of all of this, set down 2 more points so that I've got this selection. I'm going to go to my path palette. I'm going to double click on the work path and rename it. I'm going to call it right leg. And then I'm going to hold down the Command key and click on right leg to load this as a selection. Now, all of this stuff in here is pretty sharp. Typically, I would soften this. You guys already know that about me. I'm not going to soften this one because I'm going to soften the entire shadow later on. So again, back on my layers palette now, working on the pixel layer of the shadow that's on the floor. You need to fill this with black. That is now, black is my foreground color. Option delete, Command D to deselect. It gets me much closer. I'm feeling pretty good about that. You'll see that there is now a problem. You've actually got, we'll get to this later. I'm going to fix that problem later. First off, I'm going to fix the other side. Now on the other side, we've got the exact opposite problem. We've got shadow that's wider on the ground. I need to actually make it much more narrow. I'm going to zip back out a little bit so I can see a little bit more of how it's working. Again, I'm going to start right at that junction where her leg is actually hitting the back wall. I'm going to come out to the outside here now, and I'm going to click and drag out. And then again, I'm going to come back all the way to click on this to complete that path. I'm going to go to my path palette. I'm going to double click on this work path, and I'm going to call it left inside leg. And say OK to that. I'm going to command click to load this as a selection. Now what this needs to do is it needs to go away. I could do it on a layer mask. I don't want to do it on the layer mask. I want to keep it on this pixel layer. However, if we turn off everything on this pixel layer, I'm going to turn off everything except for the pixel content itself. You can see it's all happening on a blank layer. It's all of this is actually transparent. I want these things to be transparent as well. But if I hit the the delete key or the backspace key to actually do that, it's going to get rid of part of the other leg, even though I don't think I need to keep that other leg. Let me see what's going on here. No, I don't need to worry about that part, so I'm fine. Make sure that you've got the pixel layer selected. I'm turning everybody else back on. Make sure that it's the pixel of the floor shadow that we're dealing with. Again, I just need to get rid of this. The delete key will actually get rid of that. Command D to deselect. Now I've got a little weird anomaly that's happening right here on her leg. I don't like that part. To fix it really quickly, I'm just going to go to the brush, the B key, and check to make sure that this is a relatively hard brush, so around a 90%. Black is going to be my foreground color, and make it a little bit larger. And I'm just going to click. That didn't work. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to go to then, I don't want to make that white. I'm actually going to fix this where I should have fixed it. I'm going to go back to my path and start this whole process over again, and I'm going to zoom in tighter on this and see what this looks like. So we're just going to go back from the very beginning. The P key to get the pen tool, click on that point where the two should actually intersect with one another, put a little bit of bend in this to actually get it to move. I'm actually going to also stick it on the edge of her leg, and then come back around again to complete this path. Go back in, double click on the work path, left inner leg, L for left inner leg, say OK. Command click to load that as a selection. Back in here on my pixel layer for this, hit the delete key, Command D to deselect, and that fits in pretty well. I have to do the same thing on the other leg. I'm going to click again and just put in something here. I'm going to leave it in like this, come back around. Call this, double click on the work path, call it left outer leg. OK. Command click to load that as a selection. Go back into the layer, still working on that pixel layer, and delete that. Command D to deselect. That seems wrong. So I'm going to go back in history to undo all of that. And try it one more time. Go to the path, rename it, left outer leg. OK, command click, loads it as a selection. Back on my pixel layer, simply delete those, Command D to deselect. So now, if we take a look at this, I've actually got the stuff from her feet go all the way back. They match up with the wall that's on the back. However, I've got one last problem here. If you look at the intersection where the floor shadow meets the background wall, there's a small, faint white line in there. That is actually the width of the selection when we got it made. Remember, we made one selection for the background, then we simply inverted that selection to mask the floor. In doing that, what ends up falling through the cracks, for lack of a better way of putting it, is the width of the selection marching ants. That's what that little white line is coming from. So we need to put these shadows together. To actually do that, hold down your Option key and click on shadow number 1's eyeball. It turns everybody else back off. Then click on shadow number 2's eyeball. That will actually show now only the two shadows. Make shadow number 2 the active layer. I'm going to double click on the hand so I kick back out. All you should see now are your two shadow layers on a transparent background. We are now going to merge these two together with your shadow number 2 selected. Hold down Command, Option, Shift, and hit the letter E. It will merge those two together, and now we have a complete shadow that is on one layer. Turn off both of your other shadows. Zoom in to her legs where that line actually meets. Hit the B key for a brush. Make sure it's a completely hard brush and a relatively small one. Normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow. Black is my foreground color, and now I can simply paint that line out. And it might even round out that leg in the bottom a little bit. I don't mind that. And then paint the other one out. Yeah, so the merge is, again, select your top shadow. Then hold down the Command, Option, Shift, and hit the letter E. I'm going to also rename that total shadow. And say OK to that. I'm going to double click on the hand. So this is what my shadow looks like now, the completed version of it. I'm going to turn on the body. I'm going to turn on all of my background. I'm not going to turn on the second body, and I'm not going to turn on the 2 shadow pieces that I used to make this. So this is the beginning. And now at this stage of the game, what a lot of people will do is a lot of people will simply drop the opacity of the total shadow. That does not look like a shadow to me. I don't believe this is being a shadow, so I'm not going to do that part. The first thing that we need to do is actually soften the shadow up. It needs to actually be softer in here. However, I also need to have it be sharper by her feet. So typically the shadow that's right next to her feet are going to be sharper. And as you start to move away, further and further away, the shadow gets softer and softer. So the shadow on the background wall is going to be softer than the shadow that's right by her feet. I need to control that part. So to do that, the best way to do it is to first convert the total shadow into a smart object. So that's what I'm going to do. I've selected Total Shadow Layer. I'm going to simply come up to the Layer menu, down to Smart Objects, and Convert to Smart Object. And then I'm going to blur this thing. So to blur it, it will work as a smart filter, which gives me a mask that allows me to control where the blurring actually happens on the image. So I'm going to come up to the Select menu, and I'm going to come down to, the Filter menu, and come down to Blur, and come down to, a lot of people will do Gaussian blur. I have found in my experience that a better blur for shadows is actually a motion blur. So that's what I'm going to pick. So if you bring up motion blur, it'll start out and you have 2 controls. I'm going to zoom in and take a look at the back shadow here just so you can see what's happening. You have 2 controls on this. You've got distance. If you click on distance and drag it up, I'm going to drag it up to like a 50. It's how extreme the motion actually is. And then you've also got angle. And right next to angle, it's supposed to look like a clock face. If you click on the handles, right now my clock face, I've got handles that are going from 9 to 3. If you click on this area, you can actually change where this goes. So I can actually change those handles so that they go from noon to 6, or from 1 to 7, or any of that. In my case, I typically leave it to go straight across the image, doing width, not height, because again, the shadow would mush going to the sides. It's not necessarily going to mush so much going up on the top of her head without any hitting her sides. So I'm going to leave this as a side-to-side shadow. I think that in my case, my distance is 47 right now. It's too strong, so I'm going to pull it back to actually try to recreate the edge I think it should be. However, you have a reference of a real shadow that's sitting right here. So if you can look at your image on the shadow that we're trying to create here and look at the real one, you can see it's not that soft. So I'm going to drag mine down. I think 11 is still too much on this. I'm going to drag mine down to around a 7. And again, zip back out and say, do those look really close to one another? That 7 might be still a little sharp, so I'm going to split the difference. I'm going to go to a 9 on mine. So if you want the same, I've got an angle virtually at 0. If you set your angle at 0, you won't know the difference between that and a -1, and a distance of 9, and I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. So then The shadow part is looking right, except remember I said the shadow by her feet would be considerably sharper. Now because I've used the motion blur on this, it's not as sharp, but it would still be sharper than we've actually got right here. I've also got a bit more of a problem in that there is other shadows that would be right here by her feet. Her feet shadow is not perfect here, but I'll show you how to fix that in just a second. But I do need to actually make this sharper as it goes back. So because I've got a smart filter on this, I'm going to click on the smart filter and then I'm going to go to the gradient tool. The G key will pick it, or just go and it's the very middle of your tool palette on the left hand side. Click on the gradient tool. Some people have the paint bucket over there. I don't know anybody who's used the paint bucket in 20 years. So if you do, change it to the gradient tool. Nobody uses the paint bucket tool. Up at the very top in your options palette, you need to click on the drop down for the type of gradient. We are going to open up the basics panel, and in the basics panel I'm going to pick the first of the gradients, which is foreground to background color. In my case it's black to white. Remember, if I use that on my layer, on my smart filter mask right now, wherever the mask is white will show the blur, wherever the mask is black will hide the blur. So that's what I'm going to leverage on here. And then in the type of gradient that we're using, because again, building our shadows, we use the radial gradient all the time. We need to change that to the linear gradient. It's the first of the little icons that are of the 5 types of gradients. So now I've got, again, a mask that's going black to white because it's foreground to background. However, what I want to do is I want to pull this mask, I want to pull the gradient from her feet towards the back wall, but I want her feet to actually be sharp. That means this part of the gradient, I want to hide this blur. It's set now. If I click on her feet and drag towards the back, it will put black in this area of her feet, which will hide the blur, which is what I want, but it will leave white on the background, which lets the blur be visible. So I'm simply going to make sure that the smart filter mask is active, and you've got little brackets around it, and simply click at her feet and drag to the back right here. And you can see it sharpened up her feet, but I've still got a really soft background that's going on the back. And you can see what happened to the gradient. You can see it inside the mask. It's actually giving me that transition. Now, I think it's a little too, the transition is a little too abrupt. So I'm simply going to click and drag another one and make it out a little bit longer. And that actually, I think, works a little bit better. If you feel like it needs a little bit of softening right by her feet, if you feel like the shadow coming off her feet needs to be a little softer, start your gradient from the right side of her feet. So look at where my cursor is. I'm going to start here and drag back. And now in this case, a little bit of that blur is actually going to happen right around her feet. But nonetheless, you guys get the idea of where this is all going, correct? We good on this part? Okay. So finally, what I'm seeing right here is we need to fix the shadow that's right by her feet a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to add a blank layer above this total shadow. And I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. And I'm simply going to paint this area in slightly. I'm just going to connect it and hit the part that's in between her feet as well. I'm not going to really do anything more than that. I was just going to add this part to it. Now, I need to make this part of the total shadow. So in order to do that, again, I'm going to hold down the my Option key and click so that I only see the total shadow. Then I'm going to click to add that little bit that I painted onto this, that I'm kept with that. I'm going to merge this into its own layer. Command, Option, Shift, and the letter E. And that's now made this my adjusted shadow. So I'm going to label this shadow adjusted or shadow edited. And say OK to that. And then I'm going to turn off that layer 3, the total shadow one. I'm going to leave all of the other shadows off, the second body. I'm going to turn on all of the background, and I'm going to turn on the girl. So basically what I've got going now is the shadow that I wanted. It's a double shadow. I've got the soft edge that's on the background. It's actually coming back from her. It's this shadow. It's all on a single layer. The problem that I have with this now, though, is it needs to match the shadow that already exists. That will never happen using opacity to do this. So instead, I'm going to hover over this shadow edited thumbnail. I'm going to hold down the command key and click. This loads it as a selection. Then I'm going to add a curve on top of that. And now the curve has actually been given that mask. I'm going to turn off the shadow edited version to show you what I've got visible right now. I did all of that work to build the mask for a curve. So you will notice that the body is on, this curve with its layer mask is on, and you'll also notice you don't see anything because I haven't done anything to the curve yet. All of the shadow ones are off. All the body, the original body is off, and then just the background layers are on. That's all that's on in this. Is everybody good on this part? Somewhat? So, what am I going to do now to get the two to match? I'm going to double click on the hand so that I can see both of these. The way shadows really work, and that's why I've turned this into a curve, is that they don't just get everything darker. What they do is they start to get rid of the highlights and they maintain the shadow part. To do that with a curve is the best way to do it because I can change the highlights dramatically without impacting the shadows or the 3/4 tones anywhere near as much. So if you come to the very top of the curve, so again, I've selected my curve here, click on the curve so that you get the curve in your properties panel, go up to the highlight point at the very top, click on it and drag it straight down. And you will see that you're starting to pull down tone. I've also got 2 sample points on here. I'm going to get rid of them and I'm going to reset my sample points. So I'm going to go to the, again, the eyedropper tool that's in my tool palette. I'm going to click on the color sampler tool. I'm going to click clear all. That gets rid of both of them. Then I'm going to add 2 more of them back. I'm going to add 1 on the shadow that I'm trying to create and another single one on the real shadow that exists. And now I've got my reference points. I know that my shadow number 1 needs to match my shadow number 2. So in my shadow number 2, the highest value in any of this is this 159 for the red. In the pull down of the luminosity, the composite RGB, I already got down to 155 for all of them. So I'm going to lift it back up till I get 159 on all of them. So now my red actually matches. So the red value of my point number 1 is matching the red value of my point number 2, which is the real one. However, the green and the blue of this fake shadow do not match the green and the blue of the real shadow. So now I'm going to click on my drop-down menu and come down to green. That's the only one. I need this green 159 to equal 154. So again, I'm going to grab the highlight point and simply drag it down till it reads 154. You can see shadows have color, and this is actually giving this shadow color. It's got more red in it than it actually has anybody else in it. So again, then I'm finally going to go to the blue and do the same thing. My blue on the fake shadow needs to read 151. It's reading 159 right now. I'm going to grab the highlight point and drag it down till it reads 151. And now my fake shadow is based on the real shadow tone and color. It matches it exactly. You take this out and print this and go to the big lab in there and show it to everybody in there and say, what's wrong with this image, whatever. They will never pick out that it is a composite. They will never pick out that it is a fake shadow. They'll never pick any of that out. They might say to you, well, I look at this and I think that the girl is actually too contrasty for this lighting situation. And she is. Because if you were in this space, not in a photo studio, but in this space, all of that white around her would be lifting the shadows on her body. Make sense? So we need to do that. I'm going to come over to her body here really quickly. It is a smart object, so we can use the best way to do contrast work is, again, shadows and highlights in the image menu, even though it's a filter. Click on the image menu, come down to adjustments, down to shadows and highlights. By default, it's going to open it up as a 35. I think this is a little too opened up. And I also think that it's an exposure issue with her as well. So it's a little bit of both. I'm going to drop the shadow opening up on her down to someplace more where I really believe it should be. So I'm going to do around 10. I feel like that. I'm going to use my preview on and off to open it up. That feels like the way it would really look. It's also opened up the exposure part on her a little bit more. And this now feels more like this scene would actually look. Did this work for you guys? And again, compound shadow. Amazing. Are we good on this part? Okay, hit the F key to go back to the pasteboard, the black one, F key to go back to this. So what I would like to do now is spend the rest of our little over a half hour working on doing composites. Next week when we will meet here, we are going to start this work all over. So we're going to start working on the composites that you guys turned in. And we're going to go through them. I want everybody to please do this because this is where you're going to really get your experience working with check layers, scaling, all of those sorts of things. So I'm not going to rush this. We don't need to get through. We won't get through anywhere near all of them today. But then plan on next week, we will spend probably the majority of the class doing composite after composite after composite to really get that experience, because this is it for compositing, and I want to make sure that you guys have a real solid understanding of that. Are we good on this part? Okay, so I am going to I need everybody to go to our server. And I'm simply going to go into the Dropbox. I'm going to grab the turn-in, which was week number 10, and I'm just going to move it to the outside. So you guys should all be able to get to week number 10 right now. And if you open it up, we're going to start with Jared's very first one. We are only going to do the 9-1s. We're not going to do the 9-2s. I haven't graded the 9-2s. I have graded the 9-1s, so you've already gotten my feedback on this part. But if you could, don't try to launch Jared's file from the server. Copy this to your desktop and then launch it from there. Say what?
You're good. I just can't get into this server. It says, well, there's no pop-up, but whenever I try and click into it, it like pops up select the volume you want to mount on.
So did you click class projects?
Yeah, it won't let me straight out.
Is that happening for anybody else, or is it just true?
No, I just got the spinning wheel of death though when I tried to click on Jared's file.
Hang on.
I think we're all just trying to like get in.
And it may be because everybody's trying to access this like all at once. Let me hang on one second. Let me see if I can post this to all of you. You did what? You don't see the week 10? Okay. It seems like it's drawing right now because I just got the preview of it. Hang on one second. I might be able to get this to you another way. Oh, I know what to do. I know what to do. I think. Let's try this instead. So I pulled Jared's 9.1 out of the week 10. Do you guys see that? Yours is what? All right, can anybody else see this file? Yeah. Oh, can you drag it to your desktop then? Yeah, you have the file, Jared. Amanda, can you get to it? So can you get to the Dropbox? And so click out of the Dropbox really quickly and then click right back into it. Or click out of my name and click right back into it. Do you see Jared at the top? Yeah. Click that and drag that to your desktop. No, not the 9.2, just the 9.1. And I'm going to open mine up from its current place on my download. And go ahead and launch it. And did everybody get on the sign in? And where is the sign in? Okay. Like I said, now would be a good time to go to your tablet as well.
Hey, Bruce, I'm just gonna look off of Sophie's because I still can't connect to this. Oh, yours isn't connected?
Well, it's trying to. It's just everybody's trying to download the same file. So guys, for next week, I'm going to pull these files out and I will do a smash link to everybody in the class so that you can just download all the files that we'll work on next week and we don't have to worry about this. Make sense? Okay, does anybody have this file? Who doesn't? Fuck.
Mine says about 5 minutes for it to finish loading. I just tried to drag it to my desktop. It says 5 more minutes.
Okay, it says yours says 5 minutes. Is anybody getting a minute mark on this? No, no, no. Okay, hang on. I'm going to try to make a quick copy of this, and we'll send this around really fast. All right, this hard drive has, who needs it? It's just called Callaway Jared. Can you pass that around?
Yes.
Oh, and if you need the other kind of plug.
I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, where are we?
Yeah, we're probably only going to get through this one, but that's okay. Did that work, Sophie?
Yes.
So true, you have it now?
Grabbing it right now.
Okay. Okay, so who needs this after Amanda? Okay. Is it, do you have the other plug?
Here, I got it.
Here, go for it.
Oh, wait, no, I don't.
Here.
No, I don't.
Are you good? Okay.
It still has about a minute left.
That's, you'll probably be beating some of these other people out because it's got to come all the way over to Jobella needs it.
Oh, okay. I'm good.
Oh, yes. Yes, I can see here my 18 slots that I asked for.
It is. So I have what you need. So take that out so we can give that to Jobella, and I'm going to give you what you need right now. I was wondering about that. Sorry. No, but I can give it, I've got what you need. And take this. So you just regular that USB, not the C, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And anybody other than, does everybody else have it? Okay. 1 second and we'll be there, guys. Like I say, I'm going to pull together all the image files that we're going to work with next week. I will group them together. I'll send it to you guys with a Smash transfer invite, and you can download the whole thing and just be ready for. We don't have to go through this next week. Did that jump drive work? Okay, so if everybody can double click on that and get it up into Photoshop. So, not that you guys would specifically know this, but I can tell you, just because I've worked with these images quite a bit, I know that the horizon line for both of the figures that I gave you, I actually shoot very low in the studio, and so you can figure out the horizon lines from elements that are actually in the studio. So I know where the horizon lines are for both of these figures, and it runs pretty much right about where their belly button is. It's pretty much right in the middle. So if that becomes an issue for us, something that we're trying to figure out, then at least you know where the horizon line is for the figures, and then we'll talk about the rest. To show you how I figured that part out really fast, if we take a look at, and you're going to need to go here anyway, so we need to look at where those two figures came from, and they came from session 9. So if you go look at your session 9 folder, inside the assignment folder is both of those composites. If you double click on the girl in black to open her up as well, and I hide everybody else, then you'll see she's a smart object. If you double click on this smart object, she will open up, and you'll see that inside that smart object is a spill removal layer, and then there's a image of her on the background. If you hold down your shift key and click on the layer mask, you'll see that there's part of it. This image has actually been cropped. Photoshop has done this, not me. Photoshop did this. Nonetheless, I could actually go in and see the marks and paper that was on the floor that she was standing on, and those converging lines from that piece of seamless that she was standing on gave me the horizon line. So I just wanted you to know that's how I figured that part out. You can close, oh wait, don't close this up. You do not need, I'm going to cancel that out. You can simply close it. We still need the smart object, and you'll see why in just a second. So I'm going to move this to the side, and let's take a look at Jared's picture. So what do we think about this picture? Where's the lighting coming from in this image? Well, the lighting on the background, but where's the lighting coming from? It's full sun. Where's it hitting? Where's the sun? The sun is in the background. Look at this. Look at the light that's hitting on the floor coming from the windows. So you know that the sun is somewhere in the background coming up and hitting these windows. However, she's not in the direct path of that sunlight. She's in part of the building that's being either shaded by the building itself or the trees. Look at the floor right here that she's on. There's no direct sunlight hitting this. So that being said, is this the correct girl? So why did Verser give you two girls to choose from when he could only given you one? Because the lighting on the girl is different. The lighting on the girl in the yellow dress is very strong side light, direct light coming from the side. We don't have that situation right here. The other girl is general flat light being lit from the top. That's what we have where this person is placed right now. So we start right off the bat, wrong girl. You need to get rid of this girl right off the bat. So we're going to come in. I'm going to take a look at Jared's layers palette and just do this with me. We're going to amend this quite a bit. So I'm going to pull it out so you can actually see the layer palette. So at the very top, there's a hue saturation curve. Simply get rid of that. There is, get rid of the entire curve. I'm just hitting the delete key. The color check layer group, we can get rid of that. Just hit the delete key. The check layers, I'm going to select all of those. I'm just holding down the shift key. I'm going to select all the color balance. I'm going to select the girl itself, and I'm going to hit the delete key to get rid of all of that part. There are shadows that are still on here. I don't care about that. I'm going to get rid of those guys as well. And we're going to just start with this, the background. So if I double click on this background before we go anywhere, this is another thing that most people are not doing. I'm going to double click on this background to see what kind of smart object this is. And actually it comes up and it gives me this warning. I'm working in an older version. I think this is probably coming from Jared does most of his work, editing work in Lightroom and then brings it into Photoshop. Is that right, Jared? Probably, yeah. This isn't going to matter. I'm going to just say okay to this. We're going to take a look around this image and see what we really feel about this image. And the first thing that I want to figure out about this image is this thing color balanced? So how would I color balance this thing? Well, we need to find something in here that we know should be white. So I'm looking at what's happening on the ground, and there is a poster that's on the ground that I feel like it's crumpled up paper or crumpled up vinyl. I'm feeling like something that's on this ground should be probably white. So I'm going to grab my color picker, my white balance picker, and I'm going to come over. Again, sometimes this is a bug in Photoshop. I'm coming over onto my image, and it's not bringing the color picker icon with me, so I'm going to go back over, deselect it, reselect it, and now it gives me the color selector point. And I'm going to select on this very top part of the little white thing right there. You'll see it adds an enormous amount of warmth to this because we just color balanced the blue shadows. But I need to do that because the girl has been color balanced in the studio. I need to neutralize the color of where she is going to be. It may make the area that's on the floor too warm because those are two different color lights. But she is going to be in this shadow area, so I need to make sure it is neutral. This area that I just picked on that top part, I grabbed this little top part of the vinyl right here. When I color neutralize that, it actually color neutralized the area where she's going to be in, so these two are going to match better color-wise right off the bat. Does that make sense, everyone? I'm also going to see what Photoshop thinks about development of this image. So I'm going to click on the auto button. And when I click on the auto button, you can see it actually made the outside background slightly lighter. You can see it was actually, the exposure got dropped down, but it actually brought back information in the highlight parts. I'm okay with this. I mean, the fact that it's a change in exposure of a 1.8, the thing that most people make a mistake about when they work with any of this auto stuff is that the auto stuff optimizes your contrast like in no way that you can actually do that. However, it also gets really perverted about the exposure, so sometimes it'll optimize your contrast, it'll bring in shadow and highlight detail, but then it makes your image like way too dark or way too black. This is not an all or nothing game. You don't need to click on auto again to undo all of that. You can click on the auto to leave it and then just double click on the exposure slider to zero it back out. Now I have the contrast and the recoveries of the highlights and shadows that auto gave me, but I don't have to accept what it thinks about my exposure. So then I'm going to say okay to this, and this is a vastly different image where we're going to start from than what we have right now. So I'm going to re-anchor this. One of the things that I think happens in all of your photo practice classes is that nobody fucking teaches you people how to actually develop files. But look at the difference here. Do a Command Z. So without doing this, you start right off the bat having a different color space than you've got of your figure space. And then you're trying to bring these two things together and it just doesn't ever work. So with both of these selected, I can now bring my figure in. So I'm going to go to the figure. It is a smart object. Thank goodness. If it wasn't a smart object, I would make it one right now. It is on transparent, which is great. I'm going to simply click on this, drag it over onto my scene. And before I let go, I'm going to add the shift key. This will bring it in right into balance. It's telling me right now that I don't have the same, the bit depth of this is different. At this stage of the game, hit no. You do not want to do this. The problem I've got, and again, this is one of the reasons I know Jared brings this stuff in directly from Lightroom, is that his file is in 16-bit. It doesn't need to be in 16-bit. Every fucking thing that we do in here is going to take twice as long. So I'm going to first change his image to 8-bit. So simply come up to the image menu, down to mode, down to 8 bits per channel, not 16. You'll see that the little number up here changes from a 16 to an 8. My file is now half the size and it will go much, much, much faster. However, I've got another problem now, again, set up in Jared's preferences, and that is this image is now in ProPhoto RGB. ProPhoto RGB is far too big a space to work in 8-bit. So I need to change this to Adobe RGB. To do that, you come up to the Edit menu, down to Convert to Profile. So again, up to the Edit menu, down to Convert to Profile. A window will open up and it's going to say, okay, your source space is ProPhoto RGB, and I'm saying, yes, it is, but my working space is Adobe RGB. So in the drop-down menu here, click on it, and we are going to change this to Adobe RGB and say, okay. And now we've actually will have an 8-bit image that's in Adobe RGB, which is what my figure is in. So then I'm going to go back to the figure, click on the girl and drag it over and put her into this space. I'm going to hit Command-Z to undo that and do it the correct way. Click on the girl, drag it over, hold down the Shift key and let go and bring her into this space. So I finally got her in here, and you can see even before I go off to the races right here, from a coloring point of view, whatever, she's matching already better than the other girl matched in this setup here to begin with. So does everybody have this far? You've got the girl in the space. Are we good on this? At this stage of the game, you might want to save your work. Not that this is not homework. You're not going to turn it in. This is just a very good habit to get into. So I'm going to do a save as. I'm going to put this into my regular TOS folder. Make sure Jared has his the TIFF. That's fine. It should either be a TIFF or a Photoshop, a PSD or a TIFF file. You can also do a PBS, which is a really large Photoshop file. But in this case, we don't need to do that. I'm going to simply hit save and OK. So Photoshop file, both a Photoshop file, a PSD file has a 2 gigabyte limit. The minute you get above that, it can't handle the information. So it converts it to a PBS, which stands for a large. If you do the save as version of this, I'll do it again. You don't need to do this. Just look at my screen and I'll show you what it is. So it saves it in this format. Sorry, do a save as. Save a copy. And it's this large document format. If you pick that, it tags it instead of PDS. PDS, it does it as a PBS. Anyway. Okay, you can actually get rid of the girl now by herself. That part's done. So the first thing that we actually have to do is scale this. So where does the windowsill come in your life? Not that windowsill right there. That one's way too high. I'm going to go look out at the windows that are in the way too light lab here. They're actually all too high. So stand up, everybody, really quick. Close your eyes and then put your hands on the windowsill in your room. Wherever it is, just where's the windowsill? Imagine it in your mind, where's the windowsill, and then open your eyes. And you got really low windows, but most of us are pretty good. It's about this sort of like, I'm going to say it's like, let's say right under your chin. You could probably lean your chin on it, right? It's a guess, but it's probably pretty close. Yeah, that's ridiculous. All right, so we need to scale the girl accordingly. There's also, I've got there's a guideline on here we don't need. I'm going to get rid of this guideline really quickly. Up to the view menu, come down to guides and clear your guides. So I'm going to scale her to begin with. So Command T will bring up the transform dialog box on the girl. If you just put your cursor right in the middle, you can move her all the way over. I'm going to move her over because where I want her is sort of in this middle window. I don't want her in the front of the image. I'm going to push her to the back of the room. I want to put her foot right down next to the floor, so where the wall meets the floor. And then I need to scale her so that the window actually comes through about, sort of like below her head. So I can't even see the control handles that are sitting on the very top. That's okay, I don't need to. If you click on the link between the width and the height in the options palette, grab the anchor point, and I'm going to drop it right down to her lower foot, her right foot right here. It'll just bring everything down and her foot won't move. And then I'm going to use the scrubby slider. I'm just going to hover over the H, which stands for height. You could do it over the width, though, because you have the two locked. And I'm simply going to click and drag down. So I bring this down, and I'm going to eyeball it. Where would that thing actually be if the windowsill right here was right below her chin? And this looks to be about right for me. It moved her entire body, so I need to reset her body to make sure it's right on there. And you can see I'm still too tall right now, so I'm going to bring her down a little bit more. And so she's scaled correctly right now. If you want the same scaling for me, I ended up having a width and a height of 61.55%. I would just round it to 62%, and she'll be awfully close. So now I have her actually in scale where I want her. I can move her now around in the room. So if I hit the V key, hold down the Shift key, I can move her to the right or the left, anywhere in here. I don't want to move her this far over because I'm afraid that that's actually going to, she should be being hit by the light that's actually coming through those windows. So I'm going to leave her on this other side, but she does not need to stay right in this, she doesn't need to stay right next to the wall. She can actually come out into the room and be fine. If I want to scale her in perspective, which will be the last thing that we really get to, and then I do need you to save this work because this is what we will pick up with first thing next week. We're going to go right back into here and pick up where we left off because I don't want to rush this stuff and I want to make sure everybody in this room is doing it, okay? All right, so really quickly, I want to figure out where the horizon, I know where the horizon line of the girl is. I want to figure out where the horizon line of the room is really fast. So I'm going to go to my pasteboard, hit the F key to do it. It's just easier to do it. Then hit the P key to get the pen tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to trace converging lines of the two ledges of the image. So I'm going to start with the one that's on the left. I'm going to click and I pull down, I'm pulling out my pen line. If you do not see the rubber band, you need to go up to the little gear that's at the very top of your options palette, click on it and make sure that rubber band is checked and turned on. That is this blue line that you're seeing. I'm going to trace along the very top edge of that ledge and simply click a point. So it doesn't have to be outside of your image, it just needs to cross the sort of center. I'm going to do the same thing on the other ledge, so I'm going to just come down to the bottom of the other ledge, click a point, and again, drag out and make sure that you're tracing this edge of the ledge. Say that fast, really, time. And I'm going to click there. This actually gives me my converging lines. You can see right in the middle is where they are. My rulers are showing, so I can click on one of the top ruler and drag down and let a guideline come right across the intersection of that. And so now I can get rid of my path. It's done all the work, and I just needed to develop those converging lines. This is now the vanishing point of the path. Unfortunately, it's taller than the vanishing point of the girl. Vanishing point of the girl is right here in the middle of her stomach, right here in the area, pretty much close to where her hands are. She is out of perspective, and there is no way to get her back in, so I'm not even going to try. She's scaled right, and that's a big important part here. So she is scaled correctly. If I do want to bring her forward, I can do that part. Again, I'm going to hit Command-H to hide the guideline really quickly. If I want to bring her forward in this space, I'm going to hit Command-T to bring up the dialog box. I already told you that her horizon line is right in the sort of like where her belly button would be, so I'm going to grab this anchor point and bring it up to where her anchor point would be, then hold down the Shift key and the Option key and click on any handle. This is going to bring her straight to the camera or straight forward in the frame. So I'm simply going to bring her forward in the frame, and I'm going to bring her up so that she's, I don't want to bring her that far forward. I'm going to bring her up so she's pretty much even with the division between the two front windows, and say okay to that. And she's now where I need her in the room, scaled right, and we're good to go. Save your work, and we can do one last thing here. I'm going to go ahead and run my check layers action on this. So I'm going to go to the actions palette. Does everybody have a copy of the check layer actions that they can run? Does anybody not? All right, I'm just going to run my version of it. I'm going to turn off the color check layers, save your work, and we will pick this up next week. Are we good?